Hello, YouTube. We're back here again doing another nerd report. And this nerd report is somber and trying to gain understanding. And the question I have for today's lesson is how the mighty have fallen, or how the king has fallen. But before we get into the story, hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and then also stay for the story. So this has been popping up of late in a lot of articles. Last week, I think a lot of people were trying to preempt how many jobs were going to end up getting cut by Verizon, and this is not a braggadocious time. People losing their jobs is never one of those times where you brag about what's going on. But I look at the cellular companies from through a lens of the technical side, more from the technician, more from the network itself, and trying to understand what what the cellular companies are going to do, what they're planning on doing, what they're missing, what they're trying to do. You know, I'm always going to champion, you know, competitiveness. And I think that one of the reasons why we are here today and we're looking at this article, this is from World Socialist Web, but you could find this across the web. This one is just one that I've plucked out of off the web for the most part. But Verizon begin cutting 13,000 workers as global job massacre accelerates. So it's not just Verizon, but it's the whole job market across the board. But we're focusing on today strictly on Verizon because the job cuts really are a telltale sign of what's going on in the cellular industry as a whole. And part of the problem is I think that Verizon never really understood what competition actually was. It's one of those things where, like, when you pay attention to the cellular industry, there was a certain level of prestigiousness that Verizon and Verizon workers and a lot of people that follow the networks saw. Verizon being, probably, one of the better networks in America, you carry yourself in such a way that you feel like you're the king. And you don't feel like, hey, nobody can take me off my throne. Now comes 2020 and Verizon is looking at the landscape across the way, and they see a T-Mobile and Sprint finally team up together and come into the industry and finally decide to take on the throne. This has been one of those points where you got to go back and reflect and say, why didn't Verizon adjust to the competition? These are turning points that I have looked at. There's another hit to Verizon that I'm gonna talk about also, but these are those points where you ask yourself, why didn't they adjust? Why didn't they, see their competition for them really being competition, or were they mocking them and looking at them as they'll never get to the place of, being able to challenge the throne. And that's kind of how I look at these job cuts. And overall, the economy is contributing to a Verizon downturn. If you look at jobs numbers and different things, but Verizon's last quarterly earnings wasn't, spiffy and super clean either. And they hit a lot of numbers, but then all of a sudden now they have, job cuts in the thousands coming up right now, and a lot of the people are already on Reddit. And this is one of the reasons why I'm talking about it, is because it's not just corporate side. Because normally job cuts hit corporate, they'll try to be more corporate side than they be technician side, due to the fact that they don't want to have disturb the network. But you can see in Verizon's deployment through um, through them not really being very expedient deploying their C-band. It's been kind of a drag of not really deploying, but they needed to deploy it. They deploy it in hot spots where they know they're going to get, their network is going to get hit the most, but you don't really see it the same exact way you see 2.5 for T-Mobile. T-Mobile went and blanketed their mid-band everywhere, anywhere and everywhere they can. They stuck it in trees, they stuck it on cornfields, they stuck it anywhere they can as fast as they possibly can. Verizon, from my point of view, has been very stingy with their deployment, and hence the reliance on 4G a lot more than their competitors. And this is kind of where I look at this from a competitive standpoint. Verizon did not seem like they wanted to really move their feet fast, and I have a theory on on two of the reasons why. So number one comes from 2020, after April 2020, when Verizon just looks across the way and goes, "Oh look, Sprint and T-Mobile are merging. They'll never get up here." And one of the bigger factors was, with T-Mobile coming on the scene like they did, the merger was only like $26 billion, for T-Mobile to acquire Sprint, if you want to look at it from that standpoint. But what that merger brought was more assets, a lot of deeper assets, a network finally being merged together in a way that, hey, we can finally compete on the big dog level. And that's something I was always waiting on, because you don't need 15 companies to be competitive. Sometimes you only need 3 good ones. Now we have Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. Those are the 3. But part of the problem is that companies like Verizon and AT&T never really responded to the competition. AT&T kind of just has been meandering on. They don't really seem like they're really swayed by what the market is really doing, and the direction the market's going in. They raise up and scream bloody murder every once in a while, going, "You can't say that in the commercial," and then they kind of fade back into the back. But Verizon is actually the one that's been taking hits quarter after quarter, losing customers quarter after quarter. As an Uber driver, I get a chance to talk to people, and a lot of customers that are Verizon customers are looking to leave. They're on the fence. They say their bills are high. And being a Verizon customer myself, my bill is high for no reason. For the amount of data that I use, the amount of networking testing I do, yeah, it's nice to kind of see higher speeds when you're on millimeter wave, but that's not a competitive standpoint when your competitor is offering decent speeds at competitive prices. That changes the landscape, and I don't think Verizon has ever pivoted like they need to be able to pivot. Another standpoint that I think was another gut check to Verizon, and they didn't ever retaliate it or being able to kind of bounce back from, was the acquisition of their C-band. What a lot of people don't realize is Verizon technically spent double what it costs for T-Mobile and Sprint to merge to acquire C-band. And one of the things that Verizon did under 3G and transitioning to 4G was they made the transition a paid for upgrade. And they wanted to do it again underneath the 5G moniker. So underneath 4G, if you being like, let's say you had a 3G phone and you're like, man, I would love one of those new 4G phones. You literally had to pay like a $10 extra a month and buy the phone. They wanted to restructure and do the same thing again under 5G. But here's the problem. The C-band auction happened roughly, I think it was like 2021, 2022. Somebody's going to correct me, but roughly about that time, they were starting to do their transition. They wanted to charge people extra $10 to switch over to 5G. But remember, competitive landscape, they had their hands slapped because T-Mobile came out as a new company, said 5G fall. We're not going to charge you extra to be on the 5G network. That competitive slap to the face, I think, was another gut check punch to Verizon in a way that I don't think that they ever figured out how to bounce back from. The inability to finally, gain enough resources up to be able to pay for the C-band auction is probably hindering their ability to show profitability. And then you add insult to injury that you're losing customers at the same time. These are gut check points where, it can literally bring you down to your knees and you don't have any answers for. And, getting rid of one CEO to bring in another just so he can start firing a whole bunch of people. I mean, this is going to be one of those harder times for Verizon from what I could tell. I mean, especially one of the reasons why I'm talking about this article here, they went into Reddit and found like even technicians were talking about how, let's see, they were talking about like another technician commented in a Reddit post saying they're ditching field techs in favor of contractors, and contracting the work out to contractors so they don't have to pay salaries, benefits, taxes, and etc. And one of the funnier monikers is Verizon. A lot of Verizon employees, when you got a chance to kind of talk to them about T-Mobile, they always talked about how like T-Mobile's network is held on with duct tape and super glue. Well, you got ex-Verizon technicians getting ready to say the same thing about a Verizon network. So it's not going to start looking very good for a Verizon who needs to respond competitively to this market when their hands are tied and they're trying to shed stores and employees. But what do you think is causing Verizon to hemorrhage their standing, their super standing? Because I mean, from my point of view, Verizon was the king of the keep. They were on top. They were at the top. And then, pardon my Game of Thrones pun, but you are only as big as you are until somebody comes flying in with a dragon. And that's kind of what happened. T-Mobile came flying in with a dragon and scorched earth their whole kingdom. So I think that not respecting the competition makes you lose sight of what is the bigger picture, and you need to be able to compete and be nimble as your competitor. And right now, T-Mobile is very nimble. They were the first to get to the app using a app centric approach. They cut stores. They got rid of a lot of redundant stores in major cities, from what I could tell. Here in DC, there was a store like within 15 blocks of each other. Now there's one central store downtown DC. There's another central store probably in each quadrant of DC, from what I could tell. So they've cut down the number of stores to be a lot more nimble. And that's kind of how I look at it. But let me know what you think is causing the downturn of the great and mighty Verizon. I've given you my thoughts, but I'm curious to hear what you have in the comments. Thank y'all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And then also, if you can, slide that slider over and hype up the channel also. We're trying to get in front of more people. But thank y'all for watching, and y'all have a good one.